What is peace if people are still dying? What is diplomacy if bullets are still flying? And what is sovereignty if the decisions about your land, your resources, your future are being negotiated in rooms you were honestly never invited into, never even meant to be present? So, welcome back to Congo Unfiltered. Grab your cup of coffee or your uh, water or whatever, because it's going to be 1 hour of pure information. We're going to dive into what happened this week. So, all right, I'm going to start this week with something simple, a question that I think most people in power hope you never ask. So, the first question is, why do every peace agreements about Congo seems to benefit everyone except Congolese people? And I'm gonna ask this question because this week we saw it again. Another round of talks, another framework, another communique signed near Geneva in Switzerland. And while the press releases went out, while the diplomats essentially were shaking hands and minister posed for photographs, the fighting in the Congo continued. The hunger deepened. We still have displaced people. The schools, some schools are still closed. Um, People working for the state are still unpaid up until today. I think it's 2 months of being unpaid already. And the deaths in the torn region, like in the Kivu, Ituri, Beni, Goma, Bukavu, we continue to see people dying. So I've been doing this, I would say, long enough to recognize the rhythm, right? And the rhythm is this: that the international community performs urgency while tolerating performances. Uh, they pretend that they're trying to fix things. They pretend that they care about the Congolese people when in reality, the long game, they want permanence. They want the status quo to remain the same. So they perform concern while maintaining the condition that make concern necessary. I'm not sure if I'm making sense. So they perform peace while the architecture of war remains fully intact, fully intact. So this evening it's 11:25 a.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. if you're in the East Coast, and probably nighttime if you are overseas in France or Congo. I'm going to do what I always do on this show. I'm going to go beyond the headlines, beyond things that we see on in the news, and I'm also trying to connect the dots. I'm going to tell you the truth with facts. I want to remain factual with sources and with clarity, because in this moment, in these particular moments, I think it's very important for us to remain grounded in fact. Because if we don't uh, name what's happening, if we don't clearly define what's going on in the Congo or in the Great Lake region for the Congolese people, if we keep accepting the frame that is being handed to us, then I think that we are becoming participant in the very system that we claim to oppose, right? So in this episode, I have 5 parts that I'm going to dissect with you. We're going to do that together. There was a peace talks, like always. and what they actually represent. And I'm saying peace talks because we've seen the peace agreement signed in June 27th. We've talked about that in this show many times. And then December 4th, there was a strategic agreement signed, and that's when we saw President Trump himself surrounded by President Tshisekedi and President Kagame of Rwanda, Tshisekedi of Congo, and then the health, I would say, deal that was signed with the Congo. And now we've seen also this wave of migration, like deportees, like they're being called. But I'm going to refer to them as immigrants, just for the sake of dignity. So we will talk about that, the peace talks, right? And what is being demanded to or required to the Congo right now. And that's what we're trying to see. And it's being kind of like shown to us as it's being shown to us as Congolese people, the Congolese government's doing this because it's a sovereignty. When in reality, I don't really think that they have much of a choice. We're also going to discuss the human cost. That's the second point, the real, specific, and documented cost of what this conflict is doing to the Congolese people themselves. Because sometimes when we talk about numbers, when we talk about data, it seems to be like really far. You hear, or 7 million people displaced. It's just a number. 500,000 people displaced. 5.3 million dead. These are numbers that somehow disconnects us from the reality, from our human nature to empathize. So yeah, I really want in this show, in this episode, to remind folks that these are real people, these are lives that are being impacted. So in the same in the same case, we will talk about the floods that has happened in the Tshopo region, because here, Friends of the Congo, we have put together some fundraiser in the past for situations like that, right? But I really think it's important to keep those news in the radar, what's going on in the Congo and how the Congolese people are being affected, and most importantly, what those events reveal about the governance failure, because we will not be doing what we're doing at Friends of the Congo, fundraising, raise awareness, if there was a strong state with the government that deeply care about the people and not just about getting the pockets bigger. Then we're gonna go into the mineral question, the extraction of the extraction architecture being built around Congo's resources while the Congo is essentially burning. And that's I'm gonna bring back the story of the deportees that most people missed this week. I think it was one of, if not the biggest information that we've got coming from the Congo. But that really tells you more about where the U.S. Congo relations are actually heading than any press release ever will. So let's get into it. So I want to start with the peace talks between the Congolese government, Tshisekedi's government, and the M23 AFC. Um, and that peace talk particularly was held in Switzerland near Geneva, and under that mediation framework that now formally includes the United States and Qatar. We talked about that. Um, so it was reported by I won't say Western media, but Reuters, one of them, and then Al Jazeera. They both kind of like covered this particular round of negotiations. And the headlines outputs were on the surface, encouraging commitments to prisoner releases within 10 days. That's one. And also the facilitation of humanitarian aid. That's two. And then the pledge not to obstruct aid delivery to conflict affected zones. So, release of prisoner releases, I think that will go on both sides. Um, because the prisoner, when Goma and Bukavu fell, there were some prisoners that were captured in Goma and Bukavu by the M23. I would say the same thing. The M23 is also requesting or asking the Congolese government to also release some prisoners that the Congolese government has arrested throughout time, not necessarily in the midst of the conflict, but probably like before that. Um, and also talking about opening the Goma airport, and also making sure that humanitarian aid is being facilitated. And we talked about, I think it was a few weeks ago, that humanitarian workers from France that was killed in a drone strike, unofficially. I'll frame it that way, unofficially by the Congolese government, the FRDC. And but another question also is for the region that are occupied by Rwandan-backed militia. We have thousands, if not millions, of people who are being displaced. How do we make sure, as an international community, that aids are being delivered to them, even though they are in conflict-affected zone? So, on paper, really looks like a movement, an improvement. Um, so we really need to dissect or dive into what that really means in reality. But I want to ask you to kind of do something before we even assess this agreement, right? I want you to sit down with me and think about the full history of what we have been promised before. And when I say we, I'm talking about the Congolese government, I'm talking about the US government, President Trump administration, about what this peace talk will bring to the Congolese people. Um, for the past few months, Donald Trump's administration talked about the peace accords he has signed between Rwanda and Congo as something major, trying to end a 30 war, you know, a 30-year war. And they even went and went ahead of everything and jumped and started claiming that peace was already there, which is funny because on December 4th, they signed. A couple days later, a major city, I forgot the name of that city, shoot, I think I'm spacing out, fell because Rwanda backed militia advanced and were able to take that town. And then that created some, I would say, almost a diplomatic incident between the US and Rwanda, because then the US had to ask Rwanda to withdraw. And that's when we saw the series of sanctions, one first against the Rwandan Defense Force, and then we saw sanctions around against a couple Rwandan, the entire Rwandan army, right? Like, so the Rwandan officials in the army were sanctioned, few of them, and then the entire Rwandan army was sanctioned. So, but what I want us to really look at in terms of promises, right, is also when you look at the history of the Congo, because this past agreements, the Washington Accord, like it's called, it's not the first one, right? And we're gonna look at what the agreement that was, I guess, signed, discussed, and even last week, what this agreement says. But most importantly, we're gonna go back and trying to look at the history, because the pattern that we see when it comes to the Congo is the evidence, right? And I'm not really gonna bore you much with history, but I think it's very important to understand that when you see this series of agreements, this is not the first time. Lusaka in 1999, I think Lusaka is a city in Zambia, I believe. Uh, Zambia, yes, it's a capital of Zambia. And in 1999, a ceasefire agreement was signed with genuine, I would say, international backing, right? And that was, if you remember, this is really our 101 introduction to the Congo War that we talk about. Congo was invaded twice, in 1996 and in 1998, by Rwanda and Uganda, to a certain extent Burundi at some point too. So it was really important to put nations surrounding the Congo at a table, those who were supporting I think it was a coalition at that point of Joseph Kabila's father, who was president, Laurent Desire Kabila, who overthrew 32 years of Mobutu's reign, right? And he was, of course, backed by Rwanda and Uganda. So when in 1999, we are in the midst of a war of aggression. That was just like we see today, frame uh, or told as rebellion, right? Like rebel groups, armed groups. When in reality, we knew who the backers were. So they had to sit at the table. The people, the folks of the countries, kind of supporting the Kinshasa government, and also those supporting the rebels, which were Rwanda and Uganda. So genuine, I would say, international backing uh, to kind of figure out what this agreement will lead to. So it created really a structure for foreign troops withdrawal and a framework for a national dialogue. Um, and that national dialogue happened later in 2002. And before that, there was the assassination of the Congolese president, Laurent Desire Kabila. And the way I usually frame this is that this national dialogue, when you really look at it, when you really trying to identify the key actors that took part of that dialogue, it was really a dialogue between those who took weapons, and they were not necessarily Congolese. Let me explain. Because you had um, structure that was never been done or put in place before. You had one president, which was Joseph Kabila. That's the son of Laurent Désiré Kabila, who took over when his dad was assassinated. He was very young, perhaps the youngest military official, high ranking, right, in the army. But he took over. I don't know why, I don't know how, but he was the one that was chosen by who, I don't know. Probably gonna give a hint. The capital is Kigali, to lead the Congo. No elections, no experience, but merely because he was the son of, then he was able to take the reign of the Congo. So it was him and then four vice presidents. Never seen before. You go back in history, never you saw people or the international community deal with a war, with a conflict, trying to bring peace in the country and asking that all the rebel groups sit down at the table uh, into sharing power. I think later Ivory Coast will follow suits later with Laurent Gbagbo and the rebel groups in his country. And that's not what I believed. But in 2001, 2002, that was the very first time. So when you look at the people that were the vice presidents, right? They were Congolese, right? Congolese, but they were also told to be part of armed groups. That was the case of uh, Jean-Pierre Bemba, who was the leader of the MLC, Mouvement pour la Libération du Congo, that was backed by Uganda. There was Azarias Rouberois, who was one of the leaders of the RCD, Rassemblement Congolais pour la Démocratie, backed by Rwanda. You had Yerodia Abdoulaye Ndombasi, who was another vice president, but he was chosen mostly because he represented the former president, so Joseph Kabila's father, who had just been assassinated. But like I mentioned at the beginning, Laurent Désiré Kabila, he came to power. He was able to overthrow Mobutu because he was backed by Rwanda. So Laurent Désiré Kabila himself was part of an armed group called AFDL, backed by Rwanda. So Yerodia Abdoulaye Ndombasi, who is now dead, was also part of that armed groups, backed by Rwanda, right? So that's the third person. And then you had Zaidi Ngoma, who also dead. He's deceased right now. And he was presented at first as someone representing the civil society, which was surprising because people were expecting to see Etienne Tshisekedi, which is the current president's father, present, but he was sidelined, and they put Zaidi Ngoma instead. But when you read carefully his bio, when you analyze the life of Zaidi Ngoma, you will see that the guy, once upon a time, was also part of an armed groups backed by Rwanda, the RCD. So you already have four vice presidents surrounding Joseph Kabila, who himself was part of an armed groups backed by Rwanda. So you had three armed groups backed by Rwanda, you had one armed group backed by Uganda, and these are the people that will lead the country during this transition, right? So you can understand, and I'm already getting comments there. You can already understand that was not going to uh, work out. That it was going to collapse, and it did. Um, Almost immediately. And he said, thank you for highlighting that beyond the statistics such as those of displaced persons, casualties, and women affected by conflict in the DRC, there are real people with human stories and feelings. It's important to remember the human impacts beyond the numbers. Yes, appreciate you, Annie, Sister Annie. Um, so yeah. So as you can imagine, that it collapsed almost immediately as Rwanda and Uganda continued to arm and direct proxies, right, in the Congo, while maintaining the diplomatic, I would say, fiction or illusion of withdrawal, just like we've seen today, right? So the ink right there was barely dry before the fighting even resumed, right? So that was in 1990, between 1999 2002, with the Dialogue Intercongolais. Same thing, right? So Lusaka was mostly trying to focus on the nations that were backing or behind the war. The Sun City dialogue was supposed to be a national dialogue that as I proved you that it wasn't, because even the folks that were president and vice president were directly linked to Rwanda or Uganda that were invading the Congo. So the power sharing agreement that was meant really to lay the groundwork for a democratic governance and national reconciliation was really shaky, right? Really, uh, the foundation of that agreement was not strong. It was flawed from the beginning. So that produced a transitional government, like I was trying to explain, that that was transitional, yes, because that what led to the first election in 2006. But unfortunately, it also rewarded the armed actors with political appointments and ministerial positions, and establishing a precedent that has haunted the country ever since until today. Because now the idea of what people were able to grasp from that transitional governance is that if you want a position, if you want to be a minister, if you want to be a prime minister, if you want to be a vice president, you got to take a gun, right? So the message sent by the United Nations, by the United States, by France, by all these people that are composed, that are making up the international community, including regional countries, SADC, and I name them. They sent a very clear message that violence, when it comes to the issue of the Congo, that violence is a path to political legitimacy. So again, you pick up a gun, and eventually someone will notice you and will offer you a seat at the table. And that's essentially what we have seen since, like I mentioned, 1999. And then the list continues. So you had the Dialogue Intercongolais, Sun City, to Lusaka, 1999, and I'm just naming some of them that I know on top of my head. Lusaka in Zambia in 1999. You had Sun City in 2002. You also had Pretoria during essentially the same time. You had Nairobi, you had Luanda, and you had Noah, and now we have the Washington Accord, right? But something very interesting continue to come back is that each new framework arrives with fresh language, right? Fresh language, I would say, but I will also argue recycled language. New mediators, that's for sure. New facilitators, new technical communities, and each one generates to a certain extent hope among the diaspora. That's one, because the diaspora has been very active, and as you can tell, those agreements always happen outside of the Congo. So the diaspora has been very, very active when it comes to those peace talks. But I would also say cautious and cautious optimism in the NGO community and inside the Congo for the Catholic Church, for example, um, and the civil society in the Congo. So each one of those will collapse, right? Each one of those frameworks will collapse because um, the diplomats were not competent, right? Okay, let me rephrase it. The framework collapsed not because the diplomats were incompetent, not because the intentions were entirely cynical, but because the underlying structural conditions that produce these conflicts are really never actually addressed at the table, right? And let me name those structural conditions precisely because I think this is very important. I think the first is the question of Rwanda's role, right? And we've discussed. I think I've had political commentator Joanne here discuss the analysis of fellow Congolese that mentioned that Rwanda was not the 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 were not was not the core. Well, the core argument was that Rwanda is not essentially the force that is really destabilizing the Congo. That was the argument they were making. And part of me wanted to agree if you have to take the Congo over the 140 years, but we're not. We're talking about the present. So the reality is, every serious analyst, every credible UN investigation, every documented intelligence assessment points to the same conclusion when it comes to current events, when it comes to the invasion of the Congo, when it comes to armed groups taking over territories under the control of I won't say legitimate government, but a government that was given the imperium, that was given the benefit of the doubt to, like, you know what, you said that you want the elections. Okay, you want the election, lead the country, lead the Congolese people, let's do business. So now you have armed groups that are taking weapons to trying to overthrow that government, right? So the M23, if I have to just talk about the M23, does not exist and cannot operate at its current capacity without the Rwandan military support. That has been demonstrated, that has been proven. So I don't even think that there is a debate to even do about that. So the UN Group of Experts, for since 2004, when the UN Group of Experts was created, has constantly documented this. The US government, in imposing sanctions on senior Rwandan military figures this year, right, and also the entire RDF apparatus system, so the Rwandan army, the US government has implicitly or explicitly acknowledged that Rwanda is destabilizing the Congo. Yet, it's very important that every peace framework treats the conflict as though it is primarily an internal Congolese problem, right? Or at most, a bilateral DRC Rwanda issue, that cannot be resolved through that cannot be resolved through military uh, uh, forces, but through dialogue. And I think that's the problem right there, because rather than what it actually is, a case of one UN member states conducting a sustained military operation against another under the condition of deliberate international permissiveness, right? So you cannot get to peace once you don't clearly address that issue. And I mentioned Rwanda, honestly, because I'm talking about the M23. I could say the same thing about Uganda, right? I could say the same thing about Uganda because it has been also demonstrated that Uganda was or has been providing support to M23 to a certain extent. And not just M23, uh, and I still need to do an episode on that, but also on the ADF. There is also that connection that we see between the ADF and the Ugandan army also. And I think that will be a really good show, a good dive to do on that. The second structural condition is the economic incentive architecture. So we always talk about Eastern Congo, because it's very, very rich in mineral, and I will not stop talking about that, about the coltan, about gold, about cassiterite, and now lithium, also cobalt, which are creating, I would say, powerful economic incentive for sustainable instability, right? Because you want to be able to get those minerals, and you want to get those minerals the cheapest at the cheapest cost possible, if not for free, right? So you have minerals that flow out of conflict zones, right? Minerals that flow out of conflict zones do not really carry the overhead of formal taxation, environmental compliance, or even labor standards. So the U.S. doesn't really have to care about workers wearing, uh, some PPE equipment, or that workers' rights being enforced in countries like Congo. They don't care about minimum wage over there. It's all the way over there. It's all the way in the Congo. And it's even better when those areas are not even under control officially of the Congolese military, the Congolese government, because then it's a really no man's land. People can do whatever they want as long as they can get the minerals, and which what we have been seeing for the past 30 years. So minerals become then cheaper to extract on the chaos than on the governments. That's a fact. And the networks that really profits from that extraction, both within Congo and across borders, have a direct interest in making sure that governance never fully consolidates in the Congo, or should I say the Eastern Congo. And I will come back to this when we get to the mineral segments, because it is very important. The third structural condition is really the uh, accountability vacuum, and that's how I call it. Not a single senior political or military figure responsible for the documented atrocities of the past 30 years of conflict in the Congo has faced meaningful international legal accountability. Not one, not a single one. And I'm really weighing what I'm saying, and I'm really being precise when I say that. Not a single one, not one, right? The International Criminal Court has prosecuted individuals from armed groups. You've seen Bosco Tanganda, that somehow claimed to have been Congolese, but then was born in Rwanda and fought alongside Paul Kagame at some point in time. But he got, I think he was sentenced to 30 years a few years ago, to jail. Um, for war crimes, crimes against humanity. You have Thomas Lubanga as well. I think he was. I'm not sure if he's still in jail. He was released. Um, but these are just like a few names, right? But really, and these are military folks, people who were leading the armed groups, whether it is M23, CNDP, RCD, you name them. But when it comes to the political architects of this conflict, the decision makers who directed these operations from state capital, and there was a UN report that actually clearly named one of them, and it's James Kabarebe, who was Paul Kagame's right hands. He was an advisor in charge of security, I believed, before being appointed um, minister of defense, and I think right now he's the minister of foreign affairs in charge of regional cooperation. He was clearly mentioned a few years ago as being the architect, as being one of the decision makers of the M23. 2013, that report was written. Besides the sanction that we saw, which I think was kind of like huge on paper, but in reality, nothing came out of that. No prosecution. He wasn't arrested. He's still, enjoying his immunity. And 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 these political architects continue to operate with near, I would say, total impunity. And impunity is really not a passive condition, right? It is an active permission structure because it tells everyone watching that the rules really don't apply to you or don't apply when it comes to the Congo because of multiple reasons, because of geopolitical reasons, because of minerals, because of interest. So when I look at this week's agreements with the prison release commitments and the humanitarian facilitation language, I'm not dismissive, right? I'm not out here saying that it means nothing. I am saying that unless it addresses those three structural conditions, it will really follow the same trajectory that we have seen as everything that came before it, right? And on the ground, this week, the evidence was really unambiguous because despite the talks in Switzerland, we saw that fighting continued. We saw that roundabout militia is still occupying the Kivus or part of the Kivus. We still saw Congolese people dying, right? And reports from Reuters and regional conflicts monitoring groups documented clashes in the South Kivu highlands, including around Minembwe. And there was also a report of the FRDC and allied militia elements, Wazalendo, engaged the M23 aligned fighters. So M23, Twirwaneho, IFC, and all of them, right? And the Twirwaneho, which is a Banyamulenge self-defense militia, and they call themselves that, a few years ago, they actually were responsible for the killing of UN peacekeepers, which is a war crimes. They have remained active in that region, right? They say to be protecting the Banyamulenge living there. But we also saw Burundian troops deployments, which I think have served another important counterweight to M23 southward expansion because they were really trying to go south to expand, and the Congolese government was able to create a coalition with Burundi, and not necessarily to stop it, but at least to prevent Rwanda-backed militia from going further. So, what about the civilians in all of this? Because that's the most important question that we should ask. In any time that you talk about war, before you talk about who is winning, who is gaining ground, who is occupying lands, who's losing. We need to ask questions of casualties, civilians casualties, because when it comes to the Congo, when it comes to the conflicts, they are still in the crossfire. And as of April 15th, the same week these talks were happening, the United Nations Security Council held an emergency briefing. They were warning the escalating insecurity across Eastern Congo and the broader the Great Lake region. And I really want you guys to sit with that, right? Because the diplomats were talking peace in Switzerland. That's one thing that we need to understand. At the same time, the UN Security Council was warning of escalating war. On the same week, and we talk about the same conflict. And this is not a mere coincidence. This is a structure. And that is what conflict management looks like, because it is functioning, as designed. Not necessarily to end the war, but to contain it. To contain it within acceptable parameters. Contain it in the way that you can talk about death. You can talk about civilian death without ever forcing yourself or putting yourself in a situation where you're going to have to act. And I've always asked this question when it comes to a war, when you have a war happening in any part of the world, if you want to stop people to really care about that war, I don't want to say stop reporting it, but underreport it. Most importantly, you don't want to be reporting on the death toll, because that is what is bringing uh, people to go mad, right? For the case of the Congo, for example, can you imagine that the last time the United Nations or the international community counted the death in the Congo for the Congo War? It was in 2007. That's the last time that you have a documented count of the death of civilians' death in the Congo. And that count has remained to 5.3 million, and that was by the International Rescue Committee. 2007, 2008. The same case when you move, for example, you go to the war in Gaza, for example. There is the same number that people will keep telling you as if people are no longer dying in Gaza. They will tell you 40,000 people died. 40,000 is a lot. But that counts remain 40,000. Why? Because the more death you have, the more body or the more corpse that you have to count, the more accountable you become, right? So the goal is really to keep the international community engaged and the mediation framework funded, while the actual structural questions about sovereignty, resources, extractions, and accountability on the death toll remain permanently deferred, right? Because you really, again, the goal here, you really want to keep the crisis contained. You don't want to extrapolate. You don't want to really report accurately what's going on. You don't want to count the death. You don't want to be precise, but when it comes to displaced people, you want to tell a big number because you need money. You're going to ask for money to relocate those folks, to take care of those folks, even though we know how the humanitarian crisis has been profitable for some people, including the Congolese government. And there is a term for this. Besides, I mentioned the profitability of the war, but it's also called the normalization of war. And it is one of the most, I would say, dangerous things that can happen to a society, because it really breeds a particular kind of political resignation. The the sense that this simply how things are. When it comes to the Congo, they will tell you this is Congo. It will always be burning. This is Congo. It is a failed state. That is Congo. It is a poor country. That is Congo. It has corrupt leaders. That Congolese lives are simply the cost of doing geopolitical business in Central Africa. And I think that those type of rhetoric or even idea should be rejected by everyone. I reject that idea or that premise that Congo is a failed state and therefore we should let it fail, right? And I think you should also reject that because accepting that framing is not neutrality, it is complicity. Everything that I just told you about peace talks and the diplomatic framework is all of it, I would say, only matter in relation to what is actually happening to human beings on the ground, right? And I think we should not separate. When we talk about a war, we should keep in mind that the real cost of war is the people, the human lives that are being killed. And one of the most insidious, I would say, features of the international coverage of the Congo is that the people are perpetually rendered abstract. They become Congolese people, like I mentioned, have become merely a number. They become affected population. They become data points in humanitarian situation reports that frankly very few people even read, right? There are very few people outside the aid community ever actually read or care about. So for this episode, I really want to insist on that specificity because these are not abstractions. These are human beings with names, with histories, with children and parents and neighbors. Go check out the work that Genocost is doing, the Congolese Action Youth platform that is truly working with folks on the grounds. Check out the work the Friends of the Congo that we're doing because we bring to you the people who are affected by the war, the people who are living through conditions that the international community has decided by its um, sustained inaction are acceptable. Collateral damage, like President Tshisekedi said when talking about the death of Congolese people in the aftermath of the Rwandan genocide. He said it. The death in my country in the Congo are collateral damage. No, they're not. And let me start with the children of the Congo, because according to Save the Children, these are the latest reports. Attacks on school in Eastern Congo have more than tripled over the past year. 587 schools have been affected. Over 285,000 children have been directly impacted. But I want to say those numbers, and I want to stay with that number, because I think we tend to move past it too quickly. So I'm going to say that one more time. 285,000 children. That is not a figure that fits easily in the human imagination. Honestly, I don't remember when was the last time I counted until 20. When was the last time that you counted until 20? And there are 285,000 children that have been directly impacted by the war. So let me make it even more concrete. That is roughly the entire school-age population of a mid-sized American city. Think about that. Every child in a place like Pittsburgh or Cincinnati or Orlando simply removed from education. Not because of a weather event, because there was snow, and like in Oregon, whenever there was snow, everybody goes crazy. Everything shut down, even though there's 2 inches of snow. Not because of a hurricane, not because of an infrastructure failure, not because of an earthquake, not because of a bridge collapsing, but because armed actors made a deliberate strategic decision to use school buildings as military positions, as weapon storage facilities, as targets for demonstrating territorial control. And that's the consequence of, that's the reason why we have so many children affected, impacted. And I want to be really precise about the word deliberate. Because when it comes to international law, attacking schools in these conflicts is not and can never be collateral damage. Excuse me. It is not and cannot be collateral damage. It is a strategy, a method of ensuring that the next generation really, right? That the next generation of Congolese citizens grow without the intellectual institutional tools to even organize. Think about that. When you put 200,000 children out of school, how are they going to get education? How are they going to get the knowledge? They can't be gathered in the same spot, in the same place. How are they going to get the tools to organize? To understand that, yes, the Congo qualified to the World Cup, but that does not give the right to the president to even demand a third term. How are they going to assert their rights? How are they going to learn how to demand accountability? How are they going to learn how to build a democratic infrastructure that might one day hold power to account? So when you destroy education, you are not just destroying buildings, but you are also destroying the future political capacity of people, of the Congolese people. You are literally engineering a society that is easier to control. Excuse me. But I think there's also more immediate danger, right? Among those, I would say, 285,000 children who are out of school. A very significant number are at the, I say, high risk of, right? Armed groups recruitment. And this has been documented by UNICEF. UNICEF and the Child Protection Organization, that are saying that when children are not in school, unfortunately, it means they're not in school because their families are displaced. It means that they have no structure environments, no economic security, no visible future. So what happens is that the armed groups will go and fill that void. sometimes offer this sense of belonging. Hey, join our group, join our fight. You want to better your life? Look at the watch that President Tshisekedi has in his wrist, like $200,000. Patek Philippe's. You don't even have shoes. You don't even have food to eat. Come on in. Join the armed group. They offer protection. We will protect your kids. We will protect your kids. We will protect your family. If you choose to fight with us, to fight alongside us, they offer identity depending on your tribes. If you're from a certain tribes, easier for you because they're claiming to be defending you. They're claiming to defend your tribe. And sometimes they will simply abduct you. They would take you by force. And the recruitment of children into armed groups in the Congo is not a side effect of this conflict. I want to say that one more time. The recruitment of children into armed groups such as M23, Twirwaneho, or even ADF is not a side effect of this conflict. It is one of its self-perpetuating mechanism, and every school that closes is truly a recruitment pipeline that opens. Because when you don't have school, because the people are not there to operate school, the children want to be safe, so they're not going to school. There is also the healthcare system that is collapsing. Data published through the Relief Web confirms that South Kivu recorded over 4,600 cholera cases and at least 67 deaths in its first quarter in 2026 alone. 67 people already died of cholera. And just like I did, I think it's also important to put context to that number because cholera is only one dimension of a health system that has effectively collapsed across multiple eastern provinces. Cholera is a preventable disease. You don't have that here in the US or in France or in London. It is treatable. But its presence at this scale in the Congo is a direct diagnostic of an infrastructure failure, of honestly destroy water system, of overwhelmed or absent sanitation. It is a diagnostic of health facilities that have been looted, bombed, or even abandoned because health workers fled for the safety. So when you destroy a region health infrastructure through years of sustained conflict, you don't get one disease, you get many of them, right? And malnutrition there, or malnutrition related disease or illness also appear. So you get a cascade of preventable death that the international community reports on with appropriate concern and then systematically fails to address at the political level. So, for example, the DRC is the epicenter of the current global mpox outbreak, just like it was a few years ago with Ebola. So the mpox outbreak right now is a public health emergency that the World Health Organization declared a global health emergency in 2024. That was nearly 2 years ago, and that continued to spread. So, still the Congo, the eastern part, is recording the highest case count driven by the displacement crisis. Because you have, by 2023, 2024, beginning of 2024, you had about 7 million people that were displaced. So when you have that many people concentrated in one spot, when you have that many people overcrowding displacement camps, you have or you create a total collapse of health surveillance. It will be almost impossible to monitor everyone. And if you add the fact that we are in conflict affected zone, that even makes it near impossible. Because you cannot track a disease because your health workers have fled. You don't have enough volunteers, and you cannot treat those diseases because your clinics have been destroyed. You don't have equipment. And when you cannot contain it because millions of people are in constant movement, people are constantly fleeing, right? Going from camps to camps, fleeing violence, crossing borders, cycling through overcrowded camps. You get exactly what we are seeing. A disease that the world has the tools to manage, spreading through a population that has been systematically denied access to those tools. But for some reason, because that's so many people, the Congo is a country of 100 million people. 100 million people. So when the United States signed an agreement with the Congolese government over the health deal, and I think I talked about that, 1.2 billion, I believe, if I remember. The Congolese government has to come with some money. So as the US government, in exchange, and we have seen that in other countries because the Congo hasn't released anything, so we don't really know the content of what the US is asking exactly. But we know what the US was asking in other countries. The US was asking in Kenya that the Kenyan government provide access for 25 years of data. So they want to be able to have access to data of Kenyan citizens. Data they can use to create medication for diseases, but without ever guaranteeing that those vaccines, those medication will also be given to the Kenyan people. As I speak, I believe, if I'm not outdated, that case is right now at the Supreme Court. The Kenyan people are challenging this agreement at the country's Supreme Court. Zambia decided not to move forward with that same deal. But the Congo accepted, the Congo agreed, right? So I'm not saying all of this to kind of like sensationalize the crisis in the Congo. And I say it because it is a documented reality that consistently disappears in a diplomatic language of peace, of prosperity, or promise of and promise of prosperity, depending on who you're listening to. If you're listening to the Congolese government, they're going to promise jobs being created. We're signing peace agreements with the United States that will bring us jobs. They don't even talk about peace anymore. They don't even tell you the reason why they went and begged President Trump for that. It was because they wanted to end the conflict. They're not even talking about ending the conflict anymore. Now they're talking about business. They're talking about making money. What a disgusting way of commodifying people's suffering. When facilitators discuss security guarantees and confidence building measures and to protection of the civilian populations, what they are almost never discussing is accountability for these crimes. This week, M23 and the Congolese government sat down and discussed. They talked about releasing prisoners who most likely committed war crimes, who most likely raped women, who most likely killed children, who most likely created conditions in which an entire group of people were unable to live. We call it Genocost, simply because they wanted to exploit minerals. They want to occupy a region that is rich. And the absence of accountability is not a neutral condition. Again, it is a permission structure. It communicates to every armed actor in this conflict that sexual violence carries no cost, that displacing millions has no consequence, enrolling children in the army has no consequence. And that communication echoes forward indefinitely. And how can you pretend in that perspective, like in that, with that narrative, that you truly care about the Congolese people, whether you are the international community, whether you are the Congolese government? How can you pretend that you are truly for the people when you allow conflict to prolong? People cannot cultivate fields in combat zone. People cannot harvest crops that armed groups will seize. Trade routes are disrupted, meaning that even where food is produced, it cannot reach the people who need it. So, with an estimated 7 million internally displaced people in the DRC, one of the largest internal displacement situations on earth, it means that millions of people are living with no lands, no income, no agriculture access. Excuse me. No agriculture access and inadequate humanitarian supply. 7 million people at least. 7 million internally displaced people. And let me put that into perspective. 7 million people, that number exceeds the total population of many African nations. It is a displacement crisis of a scale that, if it were occurring in Europe, it will define the global security conversation for generation to come. In Congo, it is treated as a background noise. We saw what happened during the Ukraine invasion, when we saw thousands of Ukrainians flooding in Europe, fleeing Ukraine. If you consider Ukraine as part of Europe. Then the EU was like, we need to do something. It took the US a month to put in place a strategy to provide Ukrainian with what's called the TPS status, temporary protected status. Few weeks. But 30 years of crisis in the Congo, I can tell you, I can assert you that Congolese people have never been granted TPS status. Never. And this is the point that I will really keep returning to throughout these episodes, right? That none of this is natural. That the crisis in the Congo is not natural. None of it is inevitable. It is truly, when you look at it, when you pay attention to what we have been saying at Friends of the Congo, how we have been presenting you the crisis in the Congo, the suffering of Congolese people, you will understand that it is really a compounded result of deliberate political decisions. That's why we're trying to connect the dots, because these are decisions made in Kinshasa, in Kigali, in Washington, in Brussels, in Paris, in London. Decisions that have consistently prioritized everything except the safety, the dignity, and the sovereignty of the Congolese people. So the humanitarian response without political accountability is not really compassion. It is crisis perpetration, because that's when I was telling you that it is a business. People are making profits off of the suffering of the Congo. How do you think that these UN workers get paid? How many are even being deployed in the Congo? Up until today, the UN peacekeeping forces is the largest, arguably the largest in the world. Who pays the bills? And if today there is an actual peace in the Congo, where do you think they will go? They'll be jobless, right? So every dollar of aid that flows into Eastern Congo without a corresponding demand for political accountability, without the consequences for armed actors, without sustained pressure on the governments that are really backing them, without accountability for the Congolese political class that has been profiting from almost 3 decades and merely 3 families, Mobutu, Kabila's, and now Tshisekedi's. 3 decades of managed chaos. So every dollar of the aid being poured into Congo is treating the wound while leaving the knife in place. There's this really not interesting videos of Malcolm X and talking about when somebody stick a knife into your back and you trying to remove it by a few inches is not progress. Progress is really, and I'm probably paraphrasing it, I don't remember exactly what he said, is removing that knife entirely and healing the wound. That's what progress, that's what the Congolese people deserve. The Congolese people does not, the Congolese people do not need the word's pity, and they need the word's accountability. They need you and I to be actively pushing for governments to do something about the situation in the Congo, whether it is to writing letters to your representative, sharing information that we put out there, being involved, pressuring so that true accountability happen. Why is it that US tax payers and people paying taxes here, why should that money be used to bomb a refugee camp in the Congo, to bomb a refugee camp in Gaza, to destroy a bridge in Iran. Why? In the name of what? And really quick, because that I announced that I was also going to touch on that. On April 15th, torrential rain struck the Tshopo province in northeastern Congo. And according to humanitarian situation reports compiled through Relief Web, flooding affected between 14,000 to 20,000 people. Can you imagine that? 14,000 to 20,000 people. Displacements, injuries, destructions of homes and livelihoods across communities were already operating at the absolute margin of survival. And a few years ago, Friends of the Congo, we did a fundraising um, to help bring aid to the people, and I think it was Kisangani, if my memory is still correct. And I was helping, at least putting the videos together, and I was able to see the aids being delivered to them. But the hardest part was to even get to the people. Like, there is no roads, like literally no roads. I'm a civil engineer by training. I went to school for that, work doing that. So I know some stuff about roads. And when I'm telling you that there is no roads, there is no roads. People have to improvise. But we were able to do that because of the help that we got from y'all contributing, sending $1, $2, $10. We were able to buy medications. We were able to buy some stuff and send them to those people. I also want to be really careful though when I talk about this, because I do not want to make this sounds exceptional in the wrong way, right? We talking about flooding. We talking about helping those people that are literally in the remote cities or villages. But floods happen. It happens everywhere. The climate events are really intensifying globally. The Congo Basin, one of the most ecologically critical and hydrologically complex in terms of the system and how the Earth is now operating, I think is becoming more and more vulnerable. And I think Earth Week is April 21st, and Friends of the Congo has been doing activities around that. So we do recognize that with global warming and climate change, and things are different. Things are not good for everyone. That the rain was not a political decision. The rain that happened, the rain that dropped was not a political decision. I really want to be clear about that. I'm not blaming Tshisekedi's regime because he rained. I'm blaming the government because what happens after the rain drops. I think there's a critical distinction between a natural event and a catastrophe, because a natural event become catastrophes when governance is absent. Congo only has 2 seasons, dry season and rain season, only 2. So you know exactly when rain will start, and you have an idea about the frequency, how much rain we're gonna have a month, a quarter, a year. We know that. So when emergency response systems exist only on paper, when infrastructure has been neglected for decades because the political class choose personal accumulation over public investments, when communities at risk have no functional relationship with the state that might protect them, how can I not blame the government? A government that just ended to the players who sent the country to the World Cup. $100,000 at least is being reported. Unconfirmed reports with brand new vehicles, brand new, and house for all the players. But they are unable, the same government is unable to pay doctors and police officers and military folks, and even builds an irrigation system, making sure that there is road that can withstand the rain, the torrential rain. So in the Tshopo province, as across much of the DRC, what we are witnessing is really the compound effects of climate vulnerability and the government's failure. And it's very important to name the second factor precisely, because that tends to disappear in the humanitarian narrative. Because the story here becomes the floods hit Congo. The community suffered. AIDS was deployed, and we move on, right? But the question, the fundamental question that story never asks is, where was the state? Where were the early warning system, the emergency response protocols, the pre-positioned resources that a functional government maintains precisely for a moment like this? A government is not there just to sign agreements, you know, excuse me the term, bend forward for the US, for Trump. Then you go ahead and you sign. Let us have your minerals, then you go ahead, you sign. Let us have your health data, and you go ahead, you sign. Let us send you deportees, immigrants, and then you go ahead and you sign. That's not what a government is. That's not how a government is supposed to function, to operate. A government is supposed to build through years of consistent and serious government or governance investment. What we see today is a result of the investment of 2, 3, 4, 5 years ago. President Tshisekedi has been in power since 2019. So what we see today in terms of infrastructure is an investment of his past, which is absolutely nothing. Nothing to withstand rain. Nothing to prevent in 2026 of a kids dying of lack of decent water. Someone dying of cholera in 2026 because there is no potable water, no drinking water. People usually die because the roads are so poor and there is so much traffic jam. If you just think about Kinshasa, if there is an emergency, how long is it going to take you to go to the hospital? I know friends who just lost his dad recently because it took them forever to take his dad, to take their dad to the hospital. You have a couple dozens of cars gifted to soccer players who already make too much money, according to, if I have to compare that to the common Congolese folks, they make too much money. But to those who already make too much compared to the average Congolese people, we give them more. We give them cars, brand new vehicles when the city of Kinshasa is missing ambulances, literally. So the Tshisekedi administration has spent years producing development rhetoric that making promises that they are gonna build, and all of them they do that. Kabila was doing the same. I'm not gonna pretend like he was a saint. I'm not. Pretends making promises they were going to transform the Congo, the country, agendas after agendas. But when the rain comes, just the rain. We don't even have to wait for the next election cycle that are most likely going to rigged, but who cares? People are expecting elections in the Congo to be rigged anyways. But what is going to bring reality check to the leaders? Sometimes it's just the nature. You had 5 years to build something here, to build a system, to build an infrastructure. You haven't. In 5 years, you have made more trips than you have laid asphalt on the ground. You have bought more watches than you have built hospitals, clinics. So when it rains, when the rain season comes, and 20,000 people are suddenly displaced in Tshopo province, the gap between that rhetoric and the reality on the ground becomes impossible to ignore. And I really want to be clear about why this matter and why I'm talking about that, because beyond the immediate humanitarian counts, and the immediate counts is not the full story here. We see a government that is failing the people. That the IMF is saying that the Congo is set to overthrow, I'll use that term, Ethiopia has been the fifth largest economy of Africa. Congratulations, Congo. But what's the reality on the ground? Because the same IMF, the same World Bank, they are telling us that 84% of the Congolese population live under extreme poverty. So, fifth largest economy for who exactly? Who is benefiting that? So the Congo is producing, the Congo is making money. Where's all that money going? Where's that money going? Because it's not trickling down to the people. They even announced that they were going to get rid of foreign currency, so you will most likely won't see dollars, for example, circulating in the street of Kinshasa or Lumbashi. But a state that cannot really mount an adequate response to a flood affecting 20,000 people in 2026. 20,000 people. And keep in mind that the Congo is 100 million. Kinshasa alone is about 15 million people. 15 million, Kinshasa. And if you're unable to create a response to a flood affecting 20,000 people in 2026, you are structurally unprepared for what is coming at scale. As a matter of fact, you probably should not even be leading the country. And the political class that has failed to build the preparedness of the Congo, the capacity, the resiliency of the Congo, of cities, of states, provinces, will not be the one absorbing the consequences. You cannot expect them to be able to manage 7 million internally displaced folks when they can't even manage 20,000 folks victims of flooding. It's basic math. So it will be the Congolese people, specifically the poorest and most marginalized Congolese people, who will bear the full weight of that failure. And that is not faith, and that is a political choice that unfortunately we make. So while the humanitarian situation deteriorates and while the peace talks cycle, while Congolese family move from one crisis to the next, the world is not standing still and the world is moving deliberately, strategically, and with the clarity of a purpose that the Congolese political class has not matched, unfortunately. According to the Reuters and cobalt metals, and we talked about them, a US-based artificial intelligence driven mineral exploration company, right? They're using AI to literally explore minerals in the Congo, and they are backed by investors including Jeff Bezos, Bill Gates. They have launched a lithium exploration campaign in Manono. We talked about this before. In Tanganyika province, with an initial investment of $50 million for that single exploration phase alone. So this really represents a lot because it is really consequential, I would say, because it's really easy to frame it as simply foreign investment and move on. But I think it's that framing is also incomplete because Manono is not just a geographic location. Manono also sits on what geological surveys indicate may be one of the largest hard rock lithium deposit in the world. And lithium at this particular moment in history with electric vehicles is not just minerals. It is really an essential input. It is an energy storage system that really constitutes the infrastructure of what the global economy is using. They are calling it green transition, even though I don't think there is anything green about that. Because the workers and the people working, extracting, are being overexploited, are being abused. So the world, the US, Europe, China, they all made a collective decision to restructure its energy system around technology that require lithium at scale, right? And it's really significant, a significant portion of the world's recoverable lithium is in Congo. So when the world is really saying, let's just move on, right? I mean that quite literally, like move on. Like the global energy transition that is being financed by decisions made in Washington and Silicon Valley and Brussels and Beijing, really runs through the Congolese territory. And when I have been dissecting the mineral deal, the strategic mineral deal, there is that one question that comes always: the question of who controls that territory. Who controls the terms of extraction of Congolese minerals? Who captured the economic value of those resources? The Congo is set to become the fifth largest economy in the Congo, in Africa. But who's capturing that economy? That reminds me of when Congo with the, I think it was the World Bank that produced a report in 2014, I believe, and Matata Ponyo was the prime minister at the time. And they say that the minerals, the mines, the mine sector in the Congo or in the world had reached the peak. Congo, being one of the richest country in terms of mining deposit, made the most money. And they put numbers out there and they say that even though the Congo was at its peak, the Congolese people never saw the consequences of that, like the fruits of the revenue. They were talking about the corruption. They were talking about capturing that economic value, capturing the revenue of those resources. And I think that question is still relevant in 2026, particularly when we talk about the peace deal in the Congo, when we talk about the strategic mineral deal. That is also more consequential in many ways, right? Because it is strategic for whom? And that is the context in which I really want to examine the legal development in Kinshasa this week that has received almost no international attention. That we talked about in this show, the civil society trying to challenge the peace deal with the United States at the Constitutional Court. We talked about how the Constitutional Court decided to pause the procedure because they tried to notify the United States 3 times, and the United States did not want to be part of it because, as you can tell, that won't make sense. So a constitutional challenge has been filed in the DRC against the US DRC Strategic Partnership Agreement, the critical minerals deal that was negotiated and signed under Tshisekedi administration in December 2025. And that one was signed without ever going to the parliament. And I think it went to the parliament on Monday, this past Monday, literally. It was adopted with no debate for something as important as deciding that your subsoil, your soil will literally be given to the country, your decision to have companies come, but you're going to give priorities to people just because they are Americans. That you're going to sideline others because they are Chinese, because they are from Iran, because they are from Republic of North Korea, because they are from Russia, because these are the exceptions clearly written on the agreement. That is no longer sovereignty of the country when you're told who to do business with. And for something as important as that, touching to the very core of what a nation is, a sovereign nation, the member of parliaments did not even debate. This is crazy. I think the Rwanda government, and we give a lot of smoke to Rwanda. Rightfully so, they are occupying the Congo. But before President Kagame came and signed, before the minister of Rwanda came to Washington, D.C. and signed, they debated and discussed the agreements in the parliament way before June 27th, way before December 4th. The Democratic Republic of the Congo waited 2026, April 2026, April 13th, 2026, to discuss the debate to discuss the agreements, and they didn't even discuss; they just approved it. It's like when this kid that in a group, in a study group, you guys are supposed to do a projects. You didn't do anything. You're just gonna put your name and sign. That's exactly what the member of parliament did. So at first, the agreement was concluded without proper parliamentary approval, and that's a fact. In violation of the constitutional procedure. The Congolese constitution is explicit about the condition under which international agreements that affect natural resources require legislative oversight. And that argument is being made. The argument being made is that the executive bypassed those conditions. So a deal of that magnitude should have gone to the parliaments in the first place, but that didn't happen. And I talked about the agreement provided really preferential treatment to the US entities. That I mentioned that. How the agreement, and I've talked about that in previous episode as well. Shout out to Emmanuel Ofoli who posted this stream. Exclude China, exclude Iran, exclude the Republic of North Korea, exclude Russia, right? Kind of constrain who can participate in Congolese critical mineral value chains in a way that serves US strategic interests. Because the US is in competition with China. Rather than Congolese developmental interest in maximizing the value, I mean, if you are doing a better deal with China, you should be allowed to deal with China, right? If the US doesn't want, then they should be put forward a better deal. And the third one is that the agreement represents a potential erosion of the country's sovereignty over its natural resources. So all 3 points that I mentioned, and I really want to kind of like be clear about my position so that it's not being misread. I don't think that we are, last time I checked, we're not against the international partnership. I think the DRC needs investment. It needs technology, it needs transfer, it needs infrastructure development, it needs serious economic engagement with the global economy. And I don't think that we have been arguing for isolation or resource nationalism. Like, I'm not saying that. But I'm arguing for sovereignty, the principle that the terms of that engagement, whatever the Congo decide, should be. That the term of engagement with the Congolese economy must be set by Congolese institution with Congolese parliamentary oversight in the genuine interest of the Congolese people, not negotiated at the executive level under diplomatic pressure, like we've seen bypassing the parliaments, bypassing civil society, and we had to bring Maman Justine, we had to bring Congolese folks from the civil society. We had to help them organize because we believe that they have a say. Because I don't think if people in Washington, D.C. and the Hills understands that the way the system is essentially strangling the Congolese people, because we have occupation going on from the outside. We have that external pressure with the multinationals, with foreign interest, with foreign countries. But we also have that strangulation that is also happening internally with an elite that is not doing anything to improve the living condition, the socioeconomic condition of the people. And in the midst of all of that, the Congolese people see that the people that are killing us, but they also see the hands that is providing them with the money to remain in powers, the hands that is providing them with the weapons to kill us. I don't think that folks in the hills understand that if they consider the Congo as a geopolitical um what's the term I'm looking for? Strategic position, a geopolitical country for the survival of the US just because of the minerals that I mentioned. How is it in the interest of the American people or America to have 100 million people growing and despising you? How is it in the interest of America to have 100 million people realizing that the US is not a partner? The US is not working to just allow us to live. Simply, just living. Do you think that the people in Masisi care about the coltan? Do you think that the children in a hospital or in a home in Goma care about the coltan? They don't. They just want to live their lives. So in the name of geopolitics, in the name of just playing the system, you don't want to be radicalizing people. And I'm saying that genuinely because the Congo has so much to learn, and we have taken so much from the West, in terms of culture, for America, the language. I myself speak English today, went to American schools. The food, the music. There was a whole school, Congo American Language Institute, and that's where I learned English a few years ago, decades ago. So that partnership is there. But you don't want to radicalize an entire population by letting them think that all you want is the minerals and you do not care about their lives, about the lives of their kids, the lives of the women, the lives of the men. That you get access to the minerals, you do not need to slaughter an entire population. You don't need to sentence to death, perpetual death, due to poverty, due to the incapacity to live, sustain yourself, feed yourself, because you want to have enough cobalt and coltan to build your superpower military force. So that's the line from this segment that I really wanted to carry in terms of instability, that the instability does not stop extraction. I'm going to say that again. Instability does not stop extraction, and sometimes, not always, but with documented historical regularity, instability facilitates it. So when governance is weak and when institutions are fragile, when the political class is preoccupied with its own survival and its own accumulation, the terms of resources extraction are set not in the national interest, but by whoever holds the most leverage at the moment of the negotiation. And that leverage is not held in Kinshasa. The cobalt investment, the constitution challenge, the China exclusion mechanism in a strategic partnership agreement, the broader pattern of US mineral diplomacy in Central Africa, these are not separate stories. These are one story, the story of who is positioning to control the resource base that will power the 21st century economy. And the question again is, at what cost? What price the Congolese people are being asked to pay for a seat at a table where the menu was written without them? The menu was written in a language they don't comprehend. And that's what I've called it before, the fourth pillar. And I really want to, I really wanted to explain, but I really invite you guys to go ahead and watch. I think it was, I did a whole episode on that, explaining the U.S. strategic posture in Africa that we see. There was, I think, three pillars: security, cooperation, diplomatic engagement, and then the development assistance. And what I was arguing is the evidence on the past 18 months strongly support that the US is now operating on a fourth pillar in Central Africa, specifically a critical mineral strategy that really integrate diplomacy, sanctions, security architecture, and bilateral economic agreement into a really coherent framework designed to secure American access to Congolese resources in competition with China. So go ahead and check it out, or I will make sure to post that episode as well. Um, but yeah, and really quick, really quick, I want to close out with the analytical portion of today's episode with a story that I think received minimal coverage, and I posted it today on Friends of the Congo's page and mine as well. And it's a story that reveals more clearly than almost anything else we have discussed tonight, this evening, how the Congo's relationship with the United States, I think, is really toxic. And we can see that being restructured in real time. It's really toxic. It's like you want your partner to do something for you, and now you ask to be doing things that even as in your core you feel uncomfortable doing. According to Reuters and Agence France Presse, there was a first group of approximately 15 individuals deported from the United States that arrived in Kinshasa. And here's the detail that matters most: that many of these individuals are not Congolese national. They're from Ecuador and Peru, I think. They're mostly from Central America and South America. As a matter of fact, the accord with the Congolese government talks about third world countries. So we might actually see, and that will be very interesting, even maybe in the next waves, depending on how things will be framed, of Congolese folks being deported back to the Congo. Because Congo is also a third world country. And they're all being deported to the Congo or transferred to the Congolese territory under a bilateral arrangement between the Tshisekedi's government and Washington. And I wasn't surprised when I heard that, because when the genocide in Gaza started a few years ago, there were already talks between the US and the Congo so that Palestinian folks in Gaza will be sent to the Congo, because there was a need to make sure that they are out of Gaza for things that we all know are obvious. And now with the strategic agreement, the minerals, the peace deal, we see that the United States under Trump's leadership continue to ask so much to the Congolese people, to the Congolese government, without even delivering his side of the deal, because they were supposed to deliver peace. Peace as yet came in the Congo, but we're already seeing them exploiting. We're already seeing them putting $50 million to explore lithium in Manono. We're seeing them already shipping minerals to Pennsylvania. And we're seeing the US sending deportees, immigrants that came to the US to find a better lives. We've seen them being deported to the Congo. But the Congo has not seen peace. Congolese people are not at peace yet. The territory of the Congo were not fully handed to the Congolese government. Whether we like them or not, they are de facto the Congolese government. The Rwandan government and his backs, any of their backs militias, M23, Twirwaneho, the Ugandan military, the ADF, and other armed groups cannot be in control of territories, point blank, period. But we don't see peace. We don't see the entirety of the Congolese territory belonging to Congolese territory, to Congolese governments, but we see the Congolese government already making concessions and giving and accepting. But to go back to the immigrants question, to the deportation case, the first question that I have, because I think that the basic facts that are documented are sufficient to raise questions that every person who cares about Congolese sovereignty should be pressing. So the first is, why Congo, right? Congo is not the only country, by the way, and there are many of them that are agreed. But why Congo, particularly when we know what the Congo is going through? Why Congo? And other countries denied that reportedly decline to enter in this kind of third-party deportation arrangement, because I think it's really disgusting, honestly, to commodify the suffering again of people. So the Congo will get paid because the Ministry of Communication said that the tab is being taken care of the United States. The plans that these immigrants flew in, where they're gonna be staying, supposedly are being taken care of by Americans. So I suppose by the United States. So I suppose taxpayers' money. Can you imagine what could have been done with that money instead if I just have to focus here in the US? Right? But that's a question for another day. But the DRC accepted, because I don't think that the DRC had a choice to refuse. But what made the Tshisekedi government willing to accept a role that others refused? What pressure was applied, or what incentive was offered that produced this decision? All of these questions, I think the answers are still unclear because it has not been fully communicated to the people. Like always, the Congolese government has not been transparent. We don't even know where they're being housed, where these immigrants are being housed. We don't. The second question is, under what conditions are these individuals being held? I think that's very important for the Congo, who I think is one of the non-permanents at the UN Security Council. I think it's very important for us to know if they are being treated good. What is the legal framework that governs their detention or their eventual, I'll say, disposition on Congolese soil? Because they were deported from the US. Okay, I get that. That's the US sovereignty. They can do whatever they want. If they don't want you in, I guess they can kick you out. That's still legal, but here I'm not arguing the legality of things. I'm arguing the morality. Because I don't think, and I want to argue, and I even want to bet anything, that they probably was the first time for most of them, if not all, to even put their feet in the Congo. So what's the morality of sending immigrants to a country they have no ties to? Because if the DRC has accepted custody of non-nationals deported by the United States, I think that creates a set of legal obligations and also, most importantly, legal liabilities that the Congolese state has agreed to bear. What happens if one of these foreigners get killed? Because the Congo is not also safe, and I've laid down everything that is happening in the Congo. So who will bear the responsibility? The Congolese government, because these people are still citizens of a different country. Very important question to ask as we are closing out is who negotiated those terms? Was the Congolese legislator informed, let alone consulted? Was there any public debate, and I doubt that happened, before this arrangement was even finalized? Excuse me. Third, and this is the question that I think is most important. I'm very curious about that. What did the Congolese government receive in return? Again, I said that we want a peace in the Congo. We don't have peace. The Congolese people don't have peace. The Kivu, part of the Kivu still belong to Rwanda. People continue to be slaughtered. People continue to be displaced. So what did the Congolese government receive in return? What did the Congolese people receive or are going to receive? What are they going to benefit? Because I think nothing in geopolitics is free. Nothing. Every bilateral arrangement is an exchange. And even when one side of that exchange is invisible in the official communication, and when a government that is dependent on the US diplomatic positioning, on US support, in the middle partnership negotiations, and on the potential US leverage in the peace framework, when that government agrees to accept deportees that other country refuse or some country refuse, the question of what was traded is not a conspiracy thinking, and I don't want to be called a conspiracy theorist or anything. I think this is elementary political analysis. I think it is the first question that any serious analyst should ask. What is the Congo gaining into this? I can tell you that I do not have the full answer to that question yet, but I intend to keep my eyes open and keep asking. And I think we all should too. But I think overall, what this story tells me, taken alongside the minerals partnership, the constitutional challenge, the Rwandan sanctions, and the broader pattern of US strategic engagement in Central Africa, is that Congo is, the Democratic Republic of the Congo is being integrated into a geopolitical framework that is substantially larger than any single agreement. The DRC is becoming a node, I think, in a really global strategy architecture. And it's really bad that the type of leadership that the Congo has right now, because that was the opportunity, that could have been the opportunity to seize all that attraction and transform that into something tangible for the people, at least. A territory whose minerals wealth, whose geographic position at the heart of the continent, and whose diplomatic, I would say, vulnerability is like genuine needs for external support in the face of the M23 threats or the Rwanda military presence, because they are the same folks. I think that make it at the same time useful and exploitable in ways that multiple global powers are actively pursuing. And the danger here is not that only Congo, right, is being used. I don't think that's a danger. The danger here is that the terms of that use are being set without meaningful Congolese agency. And at Friends of Congo, one of the reasons why I joined Friends of the Congo a few years ago is because Friends of the Congo was giving a platform to Congolese people. That's one. Amplifying the voice and giving them the platform to express themselves. Because Friends of the Congo, we do recognize, we do acknowledge that Congolese people have agency, that they know what is good for them and they know what they want. So without really parliamentary oversight, without public accountability, without the sovereignty that the Congolese constitution demands and that the Congolese people have always deserved, the deportee story here, small as it may seem in isolation, is really a data point in a larger pattern, a larger pattern, a larger pattern that I would say um, that I've been tracking. Because when you come to understand that these pieces, these stories as pieces of a coherent strategic logic, rather than a disconnected bilateral transaction, that you need to understand that the accord signed on June 27th, right? The strategic partnership signed in December 4th. The health deal signed, I think it was in February, March, I don't remember. And now we see this wave of deportees being sent to the Congo. It is one coherent strategic logic. And when you're able to understand that, the picture here becomes much clearer and much more urgent. So, what I tried to establish in this episode was that peace talks are happening, that they are producing agreements which have so far not stopped the fighting, they have not resolved the humanitarian blockages, and have not addressed, certainly not addressed, any of the structural conditions that Rwanda military support of M23, the accountability vacuum, the extraction incentive architecture that created and sustained these conflicts. I think together we established that the human cost of this conflict is not a temporary emergency. The 285,000 children out of school, the 7 million internally displaced, none of this is a natural disaster. None of this. And all of it really is a political outcome. If you really think about that, it's the accumulated result of a deliberate destabilization, chronic governance failure, and a global system that has found the current state of Congo more useful than a Congo at peace and in full control of its own territory and resources. We have together established that as the humanitarian situation deteriorates, international investment in Congolese minerals resources is not slowing down, it is accelerating. It is accelerating in contrast to what we see on the ground because folks are making profits, but peace is not happening. The constitutional challenge that has been filed against that agreement, these are the piece really of of a story that is unfolding in real time and that will define the economic and political future of this country for decades. for decades. We will be speaking about this deal 10 years from now. And the Congo being asked to play a role in global geopolitics as a mineral supplier, as a deportation destination, as a peace framework testing ground, as a node in the US China competition for influence in Central Africa, that may benefit external actors in ways that are not always transparent. We don't know what's going on because the Congolese government never communicates to its people in a transparent way. Not always reciprocal, the partnership between the Congo and the US. It's not balanced and definitely not aligned with the Congolese interest. So those roles, all of these roles are being assigned without the democratic accountability that the Congolese constitution requires. And I think that's very important because I think that the Congolese people, they have gone through 3 decades of war. They deserve it. That's the least. Accountability, transparency. So all of these that we discussed today are not conspiracy theories. They are documented, sourced, analytically grounded realities. And the gap between the diplomatic language used to describe Congo's crisis and the material conditions that Congolese people actually live, that gap is no accident. Again, every system is designed to achieve the result it gets. It is a design feature of the system. So Congo is not poor, it is impoverished. It is not failing, it is being failed intentionally. It is not a basket case waiting to be saved by the right combination of aid and diplomacy. Congo is being structurally destabilized within a global order that benefits from its fragmentation. Because people, foreign entities, whether they are nations or multinationals, they want its minerals without its sovereignty. They want its territory without its agencies. They want its resources without the Congolese people having the power to set terms, and that is dangerous. Because that is how you genocide a nation, that's how you erase a nation. That's how you keep a nation captive. And until we are able to say that clearly, until we name it with precision, source it rigorously, and refuse to accept the humanitarian frame as literally a substitute of the political one, right? I don't think these things will fundamentally change when it comes to the Congo. Because we're going to have more agreements being signed. So the political elites in Kinshasa will continue to sign agreements. The suffering will continue. And the extraction will also continue. And this is exactly what I mean when I say peace on paper and war on the ground. And this is the entire definition of Genocost. Because we allow people to be to be genocide, to be killed, to be displaced for the sake of exploitation, for the sake of economic gain that will never benefit the Congolese people. So I hope you liked this episode, and if you did, please give us a follow on YouTube, subscribe on Instagram, on Facebook, on TikTok. We're also on Substack, so go ahead and give us a follow. because this is Congo Unfiltered, and we just don't report news. We connect the dots, we name the system, and really, truly, we refuse to be complicit, to let the Congolese people be invisible in their own story. So, like I always say, free Congo and stop the Genocost. I will see you by God grace next weekend. So have a good one, y'all.